course you know about the law of attraction. Everybody knows about the law of attraction. But did you know that it's actually just one of 12 universal laws? And if manifestation has been feeling a bit confusing or inconsistent for you, or maybe like everybody else gets it, but it doesn't really occur for you, well, maybe it's because you don't understand all of the universal laws. So this is why I'm creating this series where I break down all 12 universal laws in a way that is actually easy to understand and make sense, like no fluff, no spiritual bypassing, just like real life and real science in there as well. So let's start with the very first universal law, which is the law of divine oneness. Spiritually, this law says that everything is connected, not just poetically, but like literally. You're not separate from other people, from the environment, or from the collective emotional field that you're living inside of. And neuroscience actually backs this up. Humans are wired for co-regulations, which means that our nervous system constantly reads and responds to the emotional states of others around us. We have something called mirror neurons that are in our brain, and their job is to help us to feel what other people feel. So that's why you can walk into a room and then you immediately can sense tension there before anything is even said, or you can feel calm around certain people and have a sense of steadiness or groundedness. Your nervous system doesn't exist in isolation. It is always in conversation with the world around you. And this is also why meditation is such a powerful path to oneness. When you meditate, especially practices that will slow your breath and quiet the mind, your brain shifts into alpha and theta brainwave states. And these are the same states that are associated with deep connection, empathy, and reduced ego boundaries. So in those states, the brain becomes less focused on me versus you and more attuned to wholeness. And that feeling that people describe in meditation, that feeling of being connected or expansive, part of something larger than them, it's not imagined. It's actually a measurable neurological shift. So here's what the law of divine oneness actually looks like in everyday life. If you're constantly surrounded by stressed, reactive people, your body will actually feel on edge even if nothing is technically wrong. If you work on regulating your own nervous system, you don't just feel better, you actually change how people respond to you. Your calm calms others. Your anxiety spreads too. So oneness means that your inner work is never just personal. It ripples outward. This is the first universal law, and it's the foundation for the rest to build upon. Universal law 1, which is the universal law of divine oneness. So to understand that everything is connected, the next question sometimes that comes up is, why does everything feel the way that it does? And that brings us to the universal law 2, which is the law of vibration. Spiritually, this law says that everything carries a frequency, not just emotions, but your thoughts, your beliefs, your words, and even the stories that you repeat about yourself. And once again, neuroscience actually backs this up. Your brain is constantly moving through different brainwave states: delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. And these brainwaves actually shape how you perceive the world around you, how creative you are, how easily you learn, and how regulated your emotions actually feel. So when you're living in a high beta space, your life can feel really rushed or stressful or reactive. When you're in an alpha state, it's much calmer, focused, and open. Theta, well, deep learning, intuition, subconscious changes happen there. And delta is all about rest and repair. So here's the part that sometimes gets a little confusing. Your dominant brainwave pattern becomes your lived reality, your experience. If your nervous system lives in stress, your world feels urgent and unsafe. If your system is in more of a regulated space, then the exact same life can feel spacious and manageable. Nothing externally needs to change. Your frequency does, though. This is why just think positive doesn't really work. You can't outthink your brainwaves. Your vibration isn't about what you want. It's about the state that your nervous system is trained to return to. That's also why practices like meditation, breath work, and slowing your body down actually change your life. You move your brain out of survival and into regulation, where learning and creativity happen. And here's a simple real life example of this. Two people can have the same job, the same schedule, the same challenges that come up, but one can feel constantly overwhelmed and the other feels grounded and capable. The difference isn't motivation, but it is vibration. This law explains why manifestation responds to how you feel consistently, not just what you're wishing for occasionally. So this is part 3 in that series. And now that you understand vibration, the next law is about explaining why the outer world might be repeating itself. This is the third universal law, which is a law of correspondence. Spiritually, this law is often summed up as within, so without. meaning that your external reality is not random, but rather it's a reflection of your inner world. And neuroscience actually explains this. Your brain is constantly running something called a predictive processing. So it uses past experiences and internal beliefs to predict what's going to happen next in your life. Those beliefs actually become perception filters. They determine what you notice, what you ignore, and what your nervous system actually will react to. So you're not actually seeing reality as it is, but you're seeing reality as your brain expects it to be. If you believe that people can't be trusted, well, your brain is going to spot every sign that confirms that. If you believe that opportunities are scarce, you'll miss the ones that don't fit that exact story. The world didn't change, your filter did. This is why two people can be in the same room, hear the same conversation, and walk away with completely different experiences of it. Their inner world shaped how they perceived it. And here's what that law looks like in everyday life. If you feel undervalued internally, then you'll keep finding yourself in situations where you're overlooked. If you carry chaos inside, your external life will feel chaotic no matter how hard you try to organize it. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because your brain is matching the outside to the inside. This is also why inner work changes your life faster than forcing any kind of external change. When you shift the belief, the filter changes. When the filter changes, the world responds differently. This law reminds us that manifestation is not about controlling the outer world. It's about understanding the inner one. Now that you understand the last law that we talked about, which is the law of correspondence, this one today is the one that everybody talks about. It's probably the most familiar, and almost no one actually fully understands it. This is the law of attraction. I love it. It's my favorite one. I actually wrote a book on it. Spiritually, this law is often summed up as like attracts like. But this isn't about positive thinking or pretending that everything is fine. It's about what your system is consistently broadcasting outwardly. Neuroscience explains this through something in your brain. It's called the reticular activating system, or RAS. The RAS is a filtering mechanism. It's in your brain, and its job is to decide what's important and matters and then what should really get ignored. Because if your brain didn't have a filtering system for reality, then you would be completely overwhelmed all of the time. So here's the key. Your RAS filters based on repetition and emotional importance. So whatever you think about often and whatever carries an emotional charge gets tagged as relevant. Once it's tagged as relevant, you will start noticing it everywhere. And that's why when you're thinking about buying a new car or like a certain car, a specific one, suddenly you start to see it everywhere. The cars were always there, but then your brain just didn't really think that it mattered before. So this is how the law of attraction actually works. You don't attract what you want, you attract what your nervous system and your subconscious believe is important and familiar for you. So if you're consistently focused on lack, your brain will filter for evidence of lack. If you feel unsafe around success, opportunities will literally pass by unnoticed by you. Not because they weren't there, but because your brain didn't tag them as relevant. And this is also why manifestation feels effortless for some people and it feels exhausting for others. It's not a willpower thing, but it is a wiring thing. When your inner world shifts, your RAS system updates its filters, and suddenly opportunities feel like they're showing up out of nowhere. They're not new. You're just finally able to see them. And this is the law of attraction explained without kind of all the fluff. Everyone knows the law of attraction, but if you actually want to manifest quickly, you have to understand the principles of all 12 of the universal principles. So there's 12 principles, surprise, and I've created this series to actually help you understand all of them so that you can manifest quicker and better. So here's where manifestation stops being passive and actually starts becoming real. This is the fifth universal principle that's called inspired action. Spiritually, this principle is really simple. Alignment requires movement. Energy doesn't respond to just waiting, it responds to participation. And neuroscience explains this exactly. Your brain releases dopamine through forward motion, not visualization alone. Dopamine is not just the pleasure chemical, but it is also a motivation and learning signal. So when you take action, even a small action, your brain says, we're safe to move forward. And that signal strengthens the neural pathways that are connected with confidence, capability, and trust in your brain. And this is why just imagining a new life without changing your behaviors rarely ever works. So your nervous system needs proof, and action is proof, movement is proof. And here's what inspired action is not. It is not hustling, it's not forcing, and it's not just taking massive steps forward without it being aligned. So inspired action is taking aligned action, the next step that actually makes sense, like sending an email, having conversation, showing up before you even feel fully ready. Each step tells your nervous system, this is safe. And safety is what allows expansion. A simple real life example of this is that you can visualize confidence all day long, right? But the moment that you speak up in your meeting, your brain starts to rewire faster than any affirmation could actually work on it. Movement teaches the body what the mind already knows. This principle explains why manifestation speeds up when you stop waiting around for clarity and you start actually moving with it. This principle that we're talking about today, it gives people their power back because it explains why nothing about you is permanent. And this is the sixth universal principle. It's perpetual transmutation of energy. Spiritually, this principle says that energy can be transformed. Nothing is fixed, nothing is stuck. The neuroscience behind this provides that it's actually true. Your brain is not static, it's plastic or malleable. It can change through something called neuroplasticity. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you repeat and what you pay attention to. Thought patterns are not traits. Emotional responses are not personality. They are learned circuits in your brain. And anything learned can be changed. And this is why awareness alone can bring a shift in those patterns. And when you start to notice a reaction without judging it, you're already interrupting the old pathway. So when you repeat a new response, you strengthen a new pathway. You're creating something new. And this is how fear becomes neutrality, how stress becomes regulation, and how old stories lose their charge. Here's what this looks like in like a real life situation. If you've always been the person who overreacts or shuts down or tends to self-sabotage, that's not who you are. That's a nervous system that learned how to survive. With repetition and awareness, that energy can completely be redirected. Not overnight, right? But with consistency, absolutely. This principle is why healing actually works and why you don't need to fix yourself because you're not broken, you're adaptable. This principle we're talking about today, it's why the patterns tend to repeat in your life, even though you swear you're trying to change. This is the seventh universal principle. It's cause and effect, sometimes referred to as karma. Spiritually, this principle is very simple because every action has a consequence, not as a punishment, but as feedback. Even neuroscience explains this through something called habit loops. Every habit follows the same pattern: a cue, behavior, reward. The brain loves efficiency, so whatever you repeat gets automated. That's why reactions start happening before you consciously decide. Your brain is just running the program that it knows very well. Over time, these loops create outcomes that just feel like fate, but are actually conditioning. Here's the part that most people miss. Your thoughts are actions. Your emotions, your emotional reactions are actions, and your silence is an action as well. All of these have effects. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, your world starts to shrink. If you repeatedly speak up, your world starts to expand. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because your brain is reinforcing what you practice. A simple real life example is if every time you're stressed out, you reach for a distraction, your nervous system learns that stress equals escape. If every time you're stressed, you pause and breathe, your system learns regulation. Same trigger, but different outcomes here. So this principle reminds us that change doesn't happen through intention alone, it happens through repetition. What you practice becomes automatic, and what becomes automatic actually ends up shaping your life. It runs on default. If you understand the law of attraction, you only get about 8% of the universal principles that get you manifesting. That's why I created this series of all 12 so you can manifest quicker, faster, better. And this principle today is why some people can give endlessly but then struggle so hard to receive. This is the eighth universal principle. It's called compensation. Spiritually, this principle says that you receive in proportion to what you offer, but not just in effort, but in energy, intention, and self-value. And neuroscience explains why receiving can sometimes feel harder than giving. It's because your brain is constantly tracking value exchange at a subconscious level. It's assessing what feels safe to receive based on your own sense of worth. If your nervous system associates receiving with guilt, pressure, or unworthiness, it will quietly block it. Not because you don't deserve more, but because your system does not feel safe holding it. This is where self-worth circuitry comes in. Your beliefs about your own values determine what you allow yourself to receive, like love, money, support, opportunities, all of that. Here's what this looks like in a real life example. You might over-deliver, undercharge, or feel uncomfortable when someone praises you. You might say yes when you want to say no, and then feel a little bit resentful later. That's not generosity. That's a nervous system that has not learned how to actually receive. True compensation requires balance on both sides. When you allow yourself to receive fully, you create energetic honesty, and that honesty actually strengthens your trust, your confidence, and stability. This principle reminds us that abundance isn't about giving more. It's about being willing to receive what you already offer. Next principle that we're talking about, it explains why some situations can feel devastating to one person and then completely manageable to another. This is the 9th universal principle of relativity. Spiritually, this principle says that nothing has meaning until meaning is added to it. Events are neutral. It's the story that we attach to them that actually creates the whole experience. And neuroscience explains this through cognitive appraisal. Your brain evaluates every situation and decides what it means before your emotions even kick into it. So that interpretation determines how your nervous system responds to it. So the same event can trigger stress in one person and curiosity in another. Nothing has changed externally, but the meaning that that person gave it did. Here's what this looks like in real life. If you see a delay as a failure, your body goes into this frustration mode. If you see it as protection or even redirection, your body stays regulated. Same delay, but different experiences. This principle is why comparison is so destabilizing. It's the theft of joy. You're comparing your internal meaning making to someone's external moment. So relativity reminds us that growth isn't about changing circumstances, it's about changing our interpretation of them. When you shift the meaning, you shift the emotion. And when you shift the emotion, your behavior changes too. This is not about pretending that everything is okay or positive. It's about recognizing that you always have choice in how you relate to what happens. And the next principle that we're talking about explains why the things you resist the most tend to have the most power over you. This is the 10th universal principle of polarity. Spiritually, this principle teaches us that opposites are not separate, that they are two ends of the same spectrum. So like love and fear, confidence and insecurity, strength and vulnerability. They are not enemies, but they're truly connected. And neuroscience shows us this through how the brain actually processes emotions. Your brain doesn't operate in absolutes. It operates in experiences on a gradient, on a spectrum. So emotions are not on or off, they exist in a range. When you try to eliminate one side of the spectrum, you actually create this rigidity, and rigidity reduces resilience. Emotional flexibility, on the other hand, will allow integration to happen, and this is the ability to feel discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. Here's what this looks like in a real life scenario. If you label fear as bad, you'll fight it constantly, and what you fight tends to grow louder and bigger. When you recognize fear as part of the same spectrum as courage, it kind of loses its grip. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but it's movement in its presence. This principle reminds us that growth isn't about just choosing light and rejecting dark, but it's about holding both without losing yourself. Integration creates stability, and stability creates power. This principle that we're talking about today is why pushing harder doesn't always get you further. It's the 11th universal principle of rhythm. Spiritually, this principle teaches that everything moves in cycles. Nothing grows continuously, nothing expands without rest. Like the seasons, things change. And neuroscience shows this pretty much everywhere. Our bodies run on a circadian rhythm. Your hormones rise and fall throughout the day and the month. And your nervous system naturally oscillates between activation and recovery. Energy, mood, focus, and performance are all cyclical. When you try to override these cycles, burnout shows up. So here's what that looks like in real life. If you expect yourself to be productive at the same level every single day, your system will eventually revolt against you. If you ignore rest signals, your body will force rest at some point. not as a punishment, but truly as protection. And this principle explains why honoring your own natural rhythms creates more sustainable success long term. Rest is not failure of discipline, it is a requirement for regulation to happen. When you work with cycles instead of against them, effort feels much lighter and results last longer. This is why slowing down at the right time actually speeds things up at the right time. Rhythm reminds us that balance isn't about doing less, it's about doing things in season. This final principle that we're talking about today, the 12th one, explains how creation actually happens. Not through force, not through just waiting, but through balance. And this is the 12th universal principle, which is considered gender. I didn't make up the names. Spiritually, this principle teaches that creation requires both masculine and feminine energy, not in terms of gender identity at all, but in energetic qualities. Structure and flow, logic and intuition, action and receptivity. And neuroscience shows us the same truth. So the brain works best when the left and the right hemispheres cooperate. The left side actually supports structure, sequencing, and analysis, and the right side supports creativity, intuition, and big picture thinking. So when one side dominates, things can feel a little lopsided and off. Too much structure without intuition leads to burnout and rigidity. Too much intuition without structure leads to overwhelm and a lack of follow through. So here's what this can look like in real life. You can have a beautiful vision, but without structure, it stays a dream. You can have the perfect plan, but without intuition, it feels almost lifeless and not energized. Creation happens when both are honored. This principle reminds us that power is not about choosing one energy over the other, but it's about integration of both. When you allow logic and intuition to work together, your decisions become clearer, your actions feel more aligned, and your nervous system feels safer moving forward. This is the final part of a 12-part series of universal principles. If you've been watching from the beginning, you now understand manifestation a lot more in depth than you originally had, and a lot more in depth than most people will ever. So like and follow for more,